Hello, welcome back to the continuation of the readings from Lost Horizon by James Hilton. We stopped last time at the point where we said that they were looking at the pilot of the hijacked plane, and they were saying probably Malinson was right in guessing the man to be Chinese. He had the typical flat nose and high cheekbones. We continue the next sentence. The night dragged slowly on. Moonlight faded after a time, and they could no longer see the distant mountain. The darkness, cold and wind increased, but at sunrise the wind suddenly dropped and the mountain showed again, grey at first, then silver, then pink, as the earliest sun's rays touched it. As the air grew warmer, Conway suggested carrying the pilot outside, where the sharp dry air might help him. This was done, and they began a second and pleasanter wait. At last the man opened his eyes and began to speak. His four passengers bent over him, but no one understood his words except Conway, who occasionally made answers. After some time the man became weaker and talked with increasing difficulty and finally died. That was about mid-morning. Conway then turned to his companions. "I am sorry to say that he told me very little, merely that we are in Tibet, which we had already realized. He didn't give any explanation of why he had brought us here, but he seemed to know the district. He spoke a kind of Chinese that I don't understand very well. But I think he said something about a monastery near here, where we could get food and shelter. Shangri-La, he called it. He urged most definitely that we should go there. This Shangri-La is probably even further from civilization," said Malinson. "I should feel happier if we were lessening the distance, not increasing it. Good God, man, aren't you going to get us back?" Conway replied patiently, "We are probably surrounded by hundreds of miles of this sort of country. I don't think we have made much hope of walking back to Peshawar." "I don't think I could probably manage it," said Miss Brinklow seriously, and Bernard nodded his head in agreement. "I think our only chance is to find some other human beings," said Conway, "and this monastery seems to be the only place in which to find them." He looked up the valley, shading his eyes against the sun. "There seems to be a path along the valley," he went on. "It doesn't look too steep, although we shall have to take it slowly. The monks may be able to supply us with porters for the return journey. We shall need them. I suggest we start at once. And now do you know that we shan't all be murdered when we... And how do you know that we shan't all be murdered when we get there?" argued Malinson. "Murder is the last thing one would expect in a Buddhist monastery," answered Conway. "And I think it's a preferable risk to being starved or frozen to death." Malinson was still angry and upset, but he answered slowly, "Very well then, we'll go to Shangri-La. But let us hope it's not halfway up that mountain." They all turned to look toward the mountain at the end of the valley, and they continued to look upwards in amazement. They could see far away, but coming towards them down the slope, the figures of men. As the figures came, this is now chapter 3, it starts, as the figures came nearer, Conway saw that there were about a dozen men. Two of them were carrying a kind of chair in which sat another man dressed in blue. Conway could not imagine where they were going, but it seemed very lucky that they should happen to be passing at that moment. He walked slowly towards them and bowed politely. To his surprise, the man in blue stepped from the chair, came forward, and held out his hand. He was a grey-haired Chinaman. He shook Conway's hand and then said in slow and careful English, "I am from the monastery at Shangri-La." Conway began to explain how he and his companions had arrived in such a lonely part of the world. The Chinaman looked at the damaged aeroplane. "It is indeed astonishing," he said politely. Then he added, "My name is Chang. Will you introduce me to your friends?" Conway was rather interested in this strange Chinaman who spoke perfect English in the lonely wilds of Tibet. He turned to the others and said, "This is Miss Brinklow, Mr. Bernard, who is an American, Mr. Malinson, and my own name is Conway. We were just going to look for your monastery. Perhaps you could give us directions for the journey?" "Oh, there is no need for that. I shall be delighted to show you the way." "But I could not think of giving you so much trouble," said Conway. "It is very kind of you, really, but I am sure we could find our own way." "It's not easy," said the Chinaman. "I insist on going with you and your friends." Conway thanked him without further argument, and Malinson added sharply, "We shan't stay long. We shall pay for everything we have, and we should like to hire some of your men to help us on our journey back." "How long do you suppose the journey to India will take?" "I really could not say at all," Chang answered calmly. "Well, I hope we are not going to have any trouble about it," said Malinson angrily. And Chang replied, "You may be sure, Mr. Malinson, that you will be honorably treated, and that in the end you will have no regrets." "In the end," Malinson said, his voice full of suspicion. But fortunately the Tibetans now offered them wine and fruit, which they had brought with them, and further argument was avoided. While they were eating, Conway looked at the mountain at the end of the valley, and at last Chang, who had been watching him for some time, said, "You are interested in our mountain, Mr. Conway?" "Yes, it's a fine sight," answered Conway. "It has a name, I suppose." "It is called Karakal." "I don't think I have ever heard of it. It is very high." "Is it very high?" "Over 28,000 feet," said Chang. "And now if you are ready, I think we should start on our journey." And so they set off for Shangri-La. They climbed slowly and steadily all morning. The path was not steep, but the great height made breathing difficult. Chang travelled in his chair and appeared to fall asleep almost at once. Conway listened carefully to the conversation of the chair bearers. He only knew a little Tibetan, but he understood that the men were glad to be returning to the monastery. After 2 miles, the path became steeper. The sun was hidden by clouds, and the air was much colder. Shortly afterwards, it seemed that they had come to the top of their climb, and the chair bearers stopped to rest for a few minutes. Bernard and Malinson were very breathless and seemed almost too tired to continue. But the Tibetans seemed anxious to go on and made signs that the rest of the journey would be less tiring. They produced ropes and fastened the party together in mountaineering fashion. When they saw that Conway was an experienced climber, they became much more respectful and allowed him to arrange his party in his own way. He put himself next to Malinson with Tibetans in front and behind. Barnard and Miss Brinklow with more Tibetans followed. The path was cut along the side of a rock wall, and it was scarcely more than 2 feet wide in places. As they climbed downhill, the air grew warmer. "Well, it's certain we could never have found the way here by ourselves," said Conway, intending to be cheerful. But Malinson did not find the remark very comforting. "And what's our plan of action when we get there?" he asked angrily. "What are we going to do? We shall have a terrible struggle getting back the way we have come." Conway did not answer. They had now reached level ground, and straight ahead, only a short distance away, lay the monastery of Shangri-La. It was a strange and almost unbelievable sight. A group of colored buildings clung to the mountainside like delicate flower petals on a rock. Beyond, sparkling in the sun, rose the snow slopes of Karakal. Looking downwards, Conway saw the distant floor of the valley, which looked delightfully fresh and green. It was sheltered from the winds, but it was also completely cut off from the outside world. As he looked, Conway suddenly had a feeling of doubt and anxiety. Perhaps Malinson's fears were not wholly wrong after all. He never exactly remembered how he and others arrived at the monastery, but he did remember his surprise at finding that the rooms were large, well warmed, and quite clean. Chang had left his chair and was already leading the way. He was quite friendly now. "I must apologize for leaving you to yourselves on the way," he said. "But the truth is that I find such journeys very tiring, and I have to take care of myself. I hope you are all not too tired." "We managed," replied Conway with a slight smile. "Good, and now if you will come with me, I will show you to your rooms. No doubt you will like baths, and afterwards I should be greatly honored if you will join me at dinner." Conway replied politely, but Malinson answered almost rudely, "And afterwards also, if you don't mind, we'll make our plans for getting away. I want to leave as soon as possible." Now, Chapter 4. At dinner that evening, Chang said with a smile, "I think we are more civilized than you expected." Conway had no wish to deny it. So far, the arrangements at Shangri-La had been all that he could wish, and certainly more than he had even ever expected. The monastery seemed to possess every modern comfort, including European baths, which had evidently been brought all the way from America. At the same time, a Chinese servant had waited on him and attended to him in the Chinese fashion. Conway had lived for nearly 10 years in China, and he thought of those years as the happiest part of his life. He liked Chinese people and Chinese ways. In particular, he liked Chinese cooking and was greatly enjoying his first meal at Shangri-La. He noticed that Chang ate nothing except a small plateful of green vegetables and drank no wine. "I eat very little," the Chinaman had explained. "I have to take care of myself." It was the reason he had given before, and Conway wondered in what way he was ill and why he needed care. It was difficult to guess his age. He might either be a young man grown old too soon, or an old man who had always taken great care of himself. After the meal was over, Conway lighted a cigarette and said to Chang, "I don't imagine that you often have strangers visiting you here." "Seldom indeed," replied the Chinaman politely. "Very few travelers come this way." Conway smiled. "I can believe it. As I came, it looked to me to be the loneliest place I ever set eyes on." Miss Brinklow now joined in the conversation and asked the Chinaman